Not often we have a speaker get the group. It's my pleasure to do an introduction that's probably not needed at all, but I wanted to do it. I first came to Spring Island in 1993 at the invitation of Bruce Lampright, and at that time I met two very special people who had become part of my life. And that's how I found out that they had been living on Spring Island since 1989 in a little house that we now call Little Cottage 2. So, and you can see why there was a little addition put on the side. So, you want to know the perspective. Jim Chaffin was born in South Boston, Virginia, went to the University of Virginia, and he'll tell more about his story from once he gets up here. Betsy, like me, is a native North Carolinian. She grew up spent much of her time in Jacksonville, North Carolina, went to UNC. And we'll have another program about Betsy telling about her first year teaching in an inner city school in Atlanta, and how she got through that. So they've got lots of stories, but tonight they're going to tell us the story about Spring Island and how it came to be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Betsy Chaffin.
Speaking of rare species, that's one of the most special. We're here tonight to tell a story you've all helped write. We hope you enjoy it, and we hope that you feel a sense of joy and a sense of pride and what we've accomplished together. Just and one other little bit of housekeeping. All of the slides that you see tonight, and as were the pictures that were in all the journals through 1995, were taken by Betsy. Just a quick synopsis. Jim Light and I started our careers at the Sea Pines Company on Hilton Head in the late 60s, working for a visionary man named Charles Frazier, who was the modern day founder of Hilton Head Island. While I was a young salesman there, a couple was coming down the intercoastal waterway from Pelham to Florida and stopped into Harbor Town, which was under construction. I met them. They bought. We became dear lifelong friends. It was Peter and Beryl Lamont. We went on from, Jim and I went on from Sea Pines to we were involved for 10 years there at Hilton Head, Amelia, Kiowa, all of the different Sea Pines communities. And in 1978, we wound up being the developers of a wonderful community in Colorado called Snowmass near Aspen, and did a community in the Pacific Northwest, a little bit of work in Southern California, but principally we're in Colorado. We got a call from a banker and a lawyer asking us if we had any desire to get our toes back in the pluff mud of the low country of South Carolina. We came down, met an interesting nuclear physicist named Wilhelm Stein from Germany, who had begun the development of Kalawasi, kind of thinking, well, how hard can this be? You know, I mean, it's just food and beverage and golf. And after about 18 months, he was crying uncle. He was ready to go back to Germany, and his banker and attorney had us come meet with him. We struck a deal, and in the mid-'80s, 1985, we bought Kalawasi Island, and I began to commute about a week a month from Colorado. While we were developing Kalawasi Island, we began to be aware of a place called Spring Island. And it was under option to a group. The Walker family had owned it for years, but it was under option to a group that had somehow gotten zoning for 5,500 units on Spring Island. And they were trying to get a bridge approved from the mainland to Kalawasi, and were having some difficulties, so they came to us to get an easement through Kalawasi, the exact same easement you drive through on your way here now. And we were delighted to have somebody who wanted to buy something from us, and we started talking to them about this easement, but on the condition that the downzoning occurred. We did not think it was the right thing for Spring Island, much less having that many automobiles driving through Kalawasi Island. So, long story short, it really, they were not able to get their bridge approved from the mainland. We weren't willing to sell them the easement through Kalawasi, and they lost their option. Now, before I go any forward, speaking of we'll talk about the Walker legacy many times tonight, but this Spring Island logo, I mean, I'd like to say that we created that. In fact, we had these very fancy designers thinking about, graphic designers thinking about logos, et cetera, and all of a sudden they saw this somewhere in the Walker house, said, "What's that?" And we told her, well, Lucille had told me that a duck stamp artist had created this for her father. And so if you look closely, this is the Spring Island logo. If you look at my pen on my shirt, it has simply two other birds on it. And the graphic designer cleaned it up. We asked Lucille and Bill if we could use it for our logo. So this authenticity began all the way back to the Walker family. So the option had been lapsed with this group that had this 5,500 unit approval, and I said, Betsy, this is something we might really ought to think about. Let's go take a look. So we got on the boat, went over in Thanksgiving of 1988 to take a look at Spring Island. What we found was a low country shooting plantation, ruins built in 1790. If you look closely, you'll see the road was going right through the middle of the ruins. It only took Betsy about 36 days to change that. But wonderful, wonderful ruins. This is the Oak Alley that you come down every day. And the road through the mystical live oak forest. Wonderful open fields and a quintessential red barn. That was a working barn that all the horses were kept in. That barn was right at Walker Landing, frankly about 100 feet. If you're facing the water, about 100 feet to the right of where the river house is today. We found 10 of these wonderful ponds that Elisha Walker had created by figuring out where fresh water was moving toward the marsh and putting a dike in place both for waterfowl and fishing. You all know these 10 ponds by name today. And an incredible Spartina marsh, 3,000 acres of Spartina marsh. And sort of the trademark of Spring Island, this incredible bird life habitat. It was about the third flock of these birds that we came across that Betsy looked at me and said, Chafe, I know your heart's always in the right place, but if we do something here, you better not screw this up. There he is.
Oh, boy.
One of the biggest impressions of that first tour around Spring Island was this guy, Gordon Mobley, who the Walker family had brought on in the late 60s, early 70s, and he was the quintessential plantation manager. He could fix anything, train anything, cook anything, and here he is with a shrimp harvest. There is a reason that the shrimp pond was called the shrimp pond. We used to harvest shrimp there. In fact, in the early days, members got a shrimp distribution sent to them. But we'll have more on Gordon later. But he is a big part of the story here. There he is on his steed. We would Betsy and I would get up in the morning from our 600 square foot cottage and go riding with Gordon to explore and look at the island. And we lived in this little cottage for 4 years. Betsy hastens to say 2.5 happy years. And if you no, that is not Betsy. If any of you had the privilege of knowing Carol and Elaine Anthony, one of the early visiting artists, that you know what was going on there. So we started with this purchase in 1990, and we brought an early team here. I saw Kathy here earlier tonight. I hope she's still here. Kathy Willis came with us from Colorado. And was the first member of our team here, followed quickly by Tommy Baisden, who helped with the marketing and visioning. Bruce Lampright was our first naturalist. Betsy felt it was very important to have a naturalist on staff helping us interpret what was here. And then along came John Baker, Dana Dribbin, Jeff Applegate, and Bill and Kim Laughlin. And Mont Blaisdell was supposed to be here tonight, but he's been trying for 2 days to get his wife on a plane through Atlanta. And Mont says I tricked him. I asked him to come in 1986 for about 6 months to help me with Kalawasi. And he's still here as our chief financial officer. What we had was a very daunting challenge. How to start? I mean, just think about this as a tabula rasa. Think about this as a blank canvas. Where does the first brush stroke go? Where do you begin? Robert Marvin, who is a land planner, a landscape architect laureate, not only in the Southeast, but he was nationally, would continue to ask us, what are you? What are you? Define yourself. Are you a nature park or a low country shooting preserve? And everything you do will either add to or detract from that. So we began to ask questions. Can natural beauty be the primary amenity? Can this thing we've fallen in love with, will that work? Can this nature be the real reason people come here? What will the market bear? What will it accept? We had Diana Pomar, one of the great national market research analysts, come and help us coordinate a charrette of friends from around the country who were in the development business and thought that Light and I had lost our mind if we were downzoning from 5,500 to 500. But the real question was, would nature be enough? And there was a Roper study that encouraged us in the late 80s that said that 65% of Americans thought of themselves as environmentalists. We thought that was a little naive because we knew those people were still throwing chewing gum wrappers out the window, but at least psychometrically they wanted to think of themselves as environmentally sensitive. And people were all of a sudden spending more time on cultural activities than sports activities in the late 80s. Now, another question was, do we do a golf course? Early was, I don't know, do we really need to do a golf? Keep in mind, we've been in the golf business since 1968, 69, but do we really need to do one? Well, in the end, the market research showed, well, if you're going to do one of these, let me tell you, Diana Pramar said, there ain't one of these. If you're talking about a nature park with a community in it, I can't find one. You got one chance. You guys got to move. Because somebody has to live it, breathe it, be part of it. Because we don't know where one of these exists. And she said, I know you maybe would like tonight have a golf course, but if you want to give yourself an edge, if you want to give yourself a chance, at least think about doing an environmentally sensitive golf course to broaden your market a little bit from these tree huggers that you're talking about. So one was, do we do a golf course? Second was, do we keep hunting? And how long do we keep hunting? Okay, major business decisions. Downzoning from 5,500 to something. We said to the planners, let's talk about 500. But if you go out there and 5,600, it's okay. If you go out there and 5,380 that fit and work, that's okay. But the goal was 500. And then how do we finance this? Now, you guys in the financial world will understand this. I mean, we're sitting down talking to bankers and investment bankers, and they look at us and say, whoa, let me get this straight. You want to do this nature park thing, and you want to do it on an island that has no bridge, no beach, and no roads. Yeah, I mean, are we missing something? So we realized very quickly we had to come up with something differently. So it was, how do we go find a group of people that we can pre-sell to and get at least enough capital to get in business? So we came up with this founders program. And that was people who knew, we made a list of people who knew us and people who knew Spring Island. Remember, the Walkers had hosted a lot of folks here, and for several years it had been a hunting preserve that people rented by the week. So there were people who knew Spring Island and knew us. And we started, we said, okay, we're going to take these 36 lots right here on the west side, go over the bridge, turn right, and we're going to sell these 36 5-acre home sites and try to raise enough money to give the Walkers enough of a down payment and get in business. Now, I want to tell you that one of the best things that happened to us is that early on, after seeing our plan and understanding what we were trying to do, those folks said yes. And that was a major turning point for us. When Bill and Lucille Hayes said, count us in, it gave us unbelievable credibility. So Bill and Lucille, who are in kind of typical Bill and Lucille, you know, they're back there, third from the back row. I just want to not only thank you for that, because that got us started, but also for all that you and your family did to give us the Spring Island that we have. Okay. Keep in mind these founders were putting up money to buy a 5-acre home site, and we were going to reserve enough money to make sure that a bridge got built. So if nothing else happened, these 36 founders were going to wind up with 5 acres on an island that had a bridge, if nothing else. So the current Spring Island members who were part of that founder group are Jack and Eutha Hobson, John and Lee Lennon, Phil and Peggy Weymouth, Bill and Cherry Gillespie. Miss Cherry is right up here. And Ed and Ginger Mitchell. And H.S. Russell, who's not here with us tonight. So, those are the folks that got us started, gave us enough money to make a down payment to the Walkers and get underway. Then the next major business decision was the Spring Island Trust. You know, Betsy kept talking about this need for something that would be there to be the oversight of all that we thought was special here. Dedicating 1,300 acres to open space with a conservation easement. There was not a community we knew of anywhere that had a transfer fee. And so we were on new ground. Not until 3 years later, when a major community in California came and got our documents and did that outside of Carmel, had there been a community that had imposed a transfer fee to support a family trust. So, we just knew, our experience had been at Sea Pines, frankly. Charles Frazier had been this visionary guy, so we had seen what had happened at Turnover, that the nature preserve there had shrunk by over a third. There had been other pieces of property sold for capital, and Betsy just felt, hey, you know what, if we're going to preserve what's here, we need to have this trust, and the trust needs to be funded so that it can have the ability to move on. The trust was here to guide the developer, to manage the nature preserves, to provide recreational and environmental recreation and environmental education, and to organize all of our cultural and intellectual programs. And finally, the rogue sales force here. One of our major business decisions was not to use typical 4-color, full-page advertising, but to use word of mouth, to do word of mouth selling. And how many of you remember how difficult it was to describe Spring Island to people? You know, your friends around the country, you were trying to get, how could you tell them what it was? So this word of mouth, this member get a member, was terribly important. Very quickly, this is our initial rogue sales team with John Baker, Bill Laughlin, Jeff Applegate. And this picture was taken on a day. Gordon's truck had begun to really break down, wasn't working very well. These sales guys started out thinking that Gordon was their helper, their assistant. They quickly found out that he was the quintessential salesman. He was the guy, they were his helper. And so these guys took up a collection, personally, gave Gordon this truck, and this is the day they gave it to him. Right there.
So as Jim has said, you know, we had this philosophy of a nature park in a community. And in looking at that, there were 3 major questions we addressed. And one was how to build or how to preserve a sense of place. One was how to create community. And the third was how to actually achieve an environmentally sensitive development. So this was a magical place when we got here, and as Jim says, that is the Walker legacy. it was a low country shooting plantation. And everything that was done in the forest and in the fields was done for quail management. So the forest had been either bush hogged or burned. The fields were planted. There was a real agrarian feel. And our desire from the very beginning was to try to maintain as much of this sense of place as we could. This is an example of this wonderful system of dirt roads that was here. You have to remember, there was not that much here. We had a little cottage that we were living in. There was one beside us where Gordon's brother Joe was living. There was Gordon's house, there was the Walker house, and that was about it. So there was very little here. The red barn was there for horses. But we decided that we wanted to keep the dirt roads as much as possible. When the golf course construction began, it was obvious that we needed Spring Island Drive to actually be paved. So we went to the county, we got a variance for the width. So it is more narrow than what you typically find in a Beaufort highway. This was a road built for hundreds of people, not for tens of thousands of people. The surface itself is a macadam, or what's referred to as a farm-to-market road. It has a pebbly surface. We did that for the aesthetics, for that look of going back in time, but also a pebbly surface might tend to slow you down just a bit. We were after slow and not fast. This was the dirt road system that we found here. So this was an early map from 1990 showing the dirt roads and showing major landmarks. So this sense of place that we're talking about, when it came to architecture, we wanted in our architectural design guidelines that we stipulated that things fit into the surroundings. They might be the low country vernacular, they might be contemporary, but the idea was to get them to fit into the surroundings. The first two cottages we built, this is the Tabby Cottage that the Yelvertons now own. It was built adjacent to the Walker House, and the Yellow Cottage that is owned by the Shins now. So these were the first two cottages. Not only were we interested in the architecture, but also the landscaping. And the landscaping really centered around two major things. And one was to use as much as possible native plants. And think of what this native plant volunteer group has done today. Propagating. And to supplement that with old-fashioned favorites such as camellias and azaleas, this is a photograph that was taken in the garden behind the Walker House. The Walker House itself, this was not a fancy or formal plantation house, but it was charming and it was welcoming and it was real. It was what we found when we got here, and we quickly made the decision to keep it. I can't tell you how many times this building was added on to. Dining room after dining room. In this living room, you notice the photographs on the wall, and we made a collection of photographs from the Cobb era, as well as the Walker era, as well as using Spring Island member photographs, so that you could get a feel for the history of Spring Island through these visual images. Looking at the interior itself, it's another example of an understatedness. There was not a desire for a decorated look or a country club look. Instead, it was a much more rustic, what would you have found in other plantation houses in this area? And that's what we did here. Even, as Jim said, Robert Marvin was just a superb person for us to work with, and his letting us know that once you decide a philosophy for something, then every single thing falls out of that philosophy, even to the point of how signs are designed. And in this case, I can't tell you how difficult it was to get a very simple sign, but we knew that's the kind of thing that was needed here. When we looked at the public spaces, the public areas, whether they were roadsides or Walker Landing, we again went back to Robert. And Robert said, look, you know, when you're in a rustic area, an agrarian area, a low country shooting plantation, things are not manicured. You want something to look cared for, but not manicured. The subtlety of that is marks a lot of the subtlety of the whole philosophy that we were about.
So given all of that, how do we create community? If you've got these folks living in this nature preserve, sounds really wonderful. But if they're all dispersed in this nature preserve, how do you create community? And obviously the word of mouth marketing helped with that because members were bringing members who shared common values. But we started talking about, okay, how do you plan for chance encounters in this nature park? How do we figure out how to get people together? Well, you start with the Walker House. Quintessential. This is from the backyard, looking over the pond into the Walker House. And we had this space, but we also had a gathering hour. Everybody came for about an hour before dinner. We called it the gathering hour, hence the name of the gathering room at the River House. But people were gathering an hour before dinner, and everybody sat down at the same time. And sometimes you didn't even know who you were going to sit down with. But that was the beginning of weaving the community together. And as Betsy said, the interior of the place was welcoming, comfortable. It made you want to be there. Here is the Walker House at our first POA meeting, if you can liken this to what we do now. And it wasn't a fancy place. It was real. It was authentic. You came into the house through a carport, you know? And as you guys have said over and over, when we have asked you what you care the most about here, it's not the architecture. It's not the interior design. It's not the condition of the golf course. It's the friends you make and the people who take care of you every day. That's what you tell us over and over. And I can see Lucille smiling from the back of the room. This is Miss Lee, who was the quintessential Southern cook. She was the Walker's cook who took care of us. And it was not only Miss Lee, it was Stanley, Martha Ford, Ellen Savage, Pam Craven, and you know who?
Hey, Beverly.
If you look closely at that name tag, it says Walker House. And I won't digress on this, but I'll only tell you that Abe came to us from the Hyatt. Abe's mother wound up being in the kitchen And Abe's mother took care of Jim Light and I when we were young bachelors at Hilton Head in 1969. So that is a connection there. And there's Miss Beverly. Miss Beverly and Rosie at Rose's Grill. It was the experience. It was the experience itself, not the architectural design. And then we go to the gazebo, and frankly, I would say that goes on today when you think of Vanessa and Melissa and all the others. They are still just part of your experience. Quickly, the gazebo. Another gathering place. Remember, I started this by saying, how do we create community? How do you create chance encounters? We didn't build the gazebo. We didn't create the gazebo. The Walker family did. They had that down on that point for oyster roasts and crab boils and quail in mid hunts. And I want to point this out to say that this is an example of one of the great lessons that our mentor Charles Frazier taught us. He said, give the best you have to everybody. He did that at Sea Pines. The very best part of the beach is what he gave to the members for their beach club. This, arguably, was the best home site on Spring Island. And we had a lady who wanted to buy it, who came up and offered us, and we said, no, we don't think so. And she said, well, everything has a price. And she went across the river and built a very large house on 3 lots. But that was something in our heritage from Charles and from the Walkers. Give the best you have to everyone. And so, how many of you have had this experience? I will tell you that we raised 2/3 of our founding member money right there with Walker, with Gordon walking in the house saying, hot stuff, coming in. Eating with your fingers. Marion Cooler and William Fripp popping oysters. And Gordon roasting quail in his white gloves over the fire. And then another gathering point were our trust talks. We didn't care how many people came. There could be 6, 8, 10, 12, but it was a statement of what we're about. Every Thursday night, there was a trust talk. It could be a visiting artist, it could be a historian, it could be a naturalist. This happened to be Joe Hamilton giving a trust talk. There's Miss Cherry again, right there. And then the visiting artist program. Betsy really felt, again, that if we had this nature preserve, not only did we need to have opportunities for people to get together, but in addition to the hunting and the nature, there really needed to be some cultural, intellectual experience. And the visiting artist program was to have artists come here who would enjoy being in this place that inspired them. And we asked them only that they would leave us a piece of their work that expressed the experience they'd had here. Today, this actually happened about 3 or 4 years ago, but every piece of art in every building on this island was created by an artist who's been here. And that is a sense of place, and by artists who live here, frankly. So that's just part of this sense of place. Carol and Elaine Anthony were all part, and Aldrich were also part of that early group. Very quickly, another part of gathering, of how do we have chance encounters, is Walker Landing. We wanted it to be a river community that had evolved over decades. This is park headquarters, if you will, here in Walker Landing. And when we started talking about the river house, the members were concerned. This will surprise some of you. We started talking about moving out of the Walker House. We were talking about spending money. And there were members who said, whoa, whoa, whoa. No country club, no fancy building. What are you doing there? You know, before we were going to leave the Walker House, the members wanted to know what was going to be at the Walker House. And so that is why we worked very hard to have it emulate some of those pictures you saw from the Walker House of being cozy, welcoming, residential, authentic, instead of clubby, if you will. We retrofitted Gordon Mobley's home that was down in Walker Landing. Gordon Mobley's home, where he raised his family, is the sales office. We retrofitted that. I'll show it to you a little bit later. And the quintessential gathering place, the post office. That was on purpose. Not to have mailboxes along the road.
Right.
And to also have members come to the post office every day and bump into each other and look at their cubbies and look at announcements. And so all of that was part of the planning of the of creating community. Another thing was Spring Island Trust environmental recreation and education. Here is Bruce leading a early nature walk, and how many times a week now are there opportunities for members to get together and do something with the trust that brings members together for a chance encounter. And all of this went on with kayaking, bird walks, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, this place we're in right here. You guys are sitting in a quail incubation facility. The reason it's called the Art Barn is that this is where Gordon raised 20,000 quail every year that arrived here about the size of your thumb, and he would raise them and release them. And once that operation was by the wayside, the discussion was, well, this is open to us, not a very attractive building anyway, let's just push it down. Miss Betsy did not agree with that decision at all, standing in front of the bulldozer. Was just saying, whoa, 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 whoa. At the very least, we can have, I think, a few art studios down there. And frankly, you know, Jimmy, if this whole idea of these trust talks takes off, we're going to need a place for people to get together. So that's why we're here tonight. Miss
So we've talked about a sense of place. We've talked about building community. And then the third question is, how do you actually accomplish an environmentally sensitive development? And certainly a major part of that is the Spring Island Trust. And Jim related to you experiences we had at Sea Pines Plantation, where the POA did things differently than what they would even have allowed the developer to do. So part of what the trust is about is to provide a check and balance. If you've got on your POA hat, then you're financially responsible for the well-being of the island, and that is extremely important. If you've got on your Spring Island Trust board hat, then you're responsible for the environmental and cultural integrity of the island. So it just provides two different sets of eyes in which to look at decision-making over a long period of time. This is an early document, I'm sorry you can't read it, about what the Spring Island Trust is, and goes into, Chaffin's gone into that pretty well. This is Bruce Lamplight, our first naturalist, and this is with Okatee the otter, and he raised Okatee. This This mammal had the most extensive vocabulary of any mammal I've ever been around. Bruce was an exceptional naturalist, and he was also well connected in the state. What he provided was an opportunity to ask questions. As we were doing development, he could give us the questions to ask to make sure we were really handling things in a sensitive way. One of the early questions was, here we have all these woods, all this forest, and how are we going to manage that? I would go out and ask Robert Folk, who was a forester, Robert, what should we do with these woods? And he would give me an answer. And then I would go to Mike Dennis, who was an environmental scientist, and say, well, Mike, how should we manage these woods? And it was like going to a doctor's office. You'd get a second answer. So I decided that I would do a very simple thing, that in order to find out how to really do a management policy, I would bring all the experts into the same room at the same time and ask them the same question. And I was absolutely amazed at how well they got along and how agreeable they were, and we came up with very good answers. That was the beginning of our land management team. That started in 1992, and by the fall of 1993, we had a land management plan in place. We looked at keystone species that we wanted to make sure that we could present the habitat requirements for what they need to breed, nest, rest, breed, and feed. And shorebirds were part of that. The eagle was part of that. Fox squirrel, even otter. So these species we looked at closely and the requirements. We developed burning maps and bush hogging maps so that we had an accurate idea about what we were managing. Bruce brought in different people so that we could get baseline data on what we have here. This is Richard Porcher, who's a botanist, who's one of the really foremost botanists in the state. I think you might recognize this guy. Tony came down early to do herp studies, and then there was this. So Chris came down in 1993 to provide the first breeding bird survey. He came back in 96 and became part of that land management team. And what he could do was, it was easy for people to tell us what we needed for quail. It was much more difficult for them to tell us what you needed for a painted bunting. So it was important to have a variety of people. So by 93, we had a land management plan in place. This process of having this team of experts and meeting in the fall, developing a plan, and then coming back the next fall to see what you've accomplished is still in place today. And many of the same people, Robert Folk, Mike Dennis, Al Stokes, Thomas Angel, Joe Hamilton are still involved. So you have the opportunity to see, for scientists to have been involved with Spring Island for over 20 years now. It became obvious to us very quickly that in fact the largest developer on the island was going to be the members. That collectively the members were going to make the biggest difference. So we really tried to have a very active member education program. This three-ring notebook was given to each member, and inside was the land management plan. There were also baseline studies of what we had found here, and then how to create your own habitat. It was that kind of thoroughness that I think was, we really worked hard to try to achieve. So, In addition to that, you know, we've gone into these, Jim has mentioned the different kind of nature walks, bird walks, et cetera, that we had. And this is the beginning of the Mobley Nature Center. It was, we knew we had to have a home for the Spring Island Trust, and we wanted to have a home that was in the center of the activity. The design for the building came from Bill McDonough and Jimmy Thomas. We used recycled wood from the Red Barn. This was the original Red Barn that was torn down. So we used recycled wood from there, as well as pine trees that we timbered at the south end of Spring Island when we were putting in Spring Island Drive. So by 1996, the Mobley Nature Center was under construction. The Spring Island Company gave the land. The trust gave contributions, and then we had members giving contributions as well. And Tom Cameron here, who's also in the audience, excuse me, right here, was a major help in that whole process. Tom, thank you so much for that. So, the Visiting Artist Program we've talked about, and I'd just like to say that in these formative years, we're talking 1990 to 1995, we developed a land management team and a land management plan. That's still going on today. Developed inventory lists for plants, mammals, birds, butterflies, and herbs. Determined uses of each pond and began stocking the ponds. We began an active deer management plan. Camp Spring Island began. Installation of bluebird boxes. Conducting breeding bird surveys. Here we're reintroducing turkey. These 20 turkey were released on the island at the north end, and think of how much we're enjoying those today. It's really been amazing. So it goes on and on, but you could see how really in that beginning, in those first 5 years, it was obvious that the groundwork was laid. This is Jim talking with Robert Marvin and Thomas Angel. And Robert not only had his fingerprint here, but he had been involved with Brays Island from the beginning. And he had seen Brays Island, which was an older development than Spring Island, and which is a superb development. It's truly a wonderful place. But he had seen what had happened when general managers changed, when a new POA chairman might come in, and all of a sudden the barn was painted a different color, or trees were taken down, or signs were changed, and things would fall through the crack because there was a lack of institutional memory. And he recommended that we set in place an oversight committee before we turned Spring Island over to the POA in 2000. And this oversight committee would actually manage or oversee the management of community areas. Hence was born the Stewardship Committee. And finally, this is an early trail map. I think the trail system is one of the things that is so special about Spring Island. The philosophy here was that you could leave your house and through the dirt roads and the trails that you could get to the major watering holes throughout the island, whether that was Walker Landing or the golf course or Tabby or Bonnie Shore. So that even though you owned your lot, in essence, you felt like you had the ownership of the entire island, that it was yours.
Thank you for your patience. I just want to encourage you that we're vector final here. And then a defining moment. This is my partner Jim Light and I breaking a bottle of champagne against the first piling in the bridge to Spring. It was nostalgia, but we knew there was this nostalgia. Well, it just wouldn't be the same. Spring Island wouldn't be the same, right, Lucille? and yet we knew from just history of places like Defusky and Bald Head and others that without a connection to the mainland, the evolution of a true human settlement was very difficult, very, very difficult. So, as nostalgic as it was, I will tell you that there were one of the favorite activities in the evening was to go down to the bridge site and see just how many feet had been added to the bridge. And here we are, October the 5th, 1991.
Wow.
Gordon and his daughters and Betsy and I coming over the bridge in the Spring Island hunt wagon as it was finally connected to the mainland. As I said, the island would never be the same. Here is the Spring Island Company offices coming in to be settled on the bluff. And as the evolution of Walker Landing was going on and the community dock system, we had to have a bulkhead to come in to make sure there was no further erosion along the banks. This is an early picture of Walker Landing. You guys, when you're in the gathering room and you look out, you know that tree that is hanging over the bulkhead.
Yes.
There it is, right there. They wanted to take it down because it's going to be a pain in the butt to put those sheet pilings in, but they figured out a way. These are our offices here. Gordon's house is here. This is the Oak Alley that you come down. And that Oak Alley didn't stop where it stops now. It went all along the bluff, down to the end of Pinckney Point, or where the boat landing is today, because that's where the Walker dock was, where they would come. Fitness center is here, ball field is here. So this is the early days of creating a gathering spot. These were our offices. Sales were here, my office was here, and Ross was here. The first nature center was right there. You see the first pilings going in right there. And the treehouse being built. And then the old Tabby Lakes.
Oh my goodness.
You can see here the ruins, the ninth hole, the ninth green was there, and and there's the pond that you play over. It was there. And so this was a hunting field here. Just happened to have those trees there, and of course the golf house is there. We knew that we knew we did not want to be a golf course community. We didn't want to be a country club. It was okay to be a great community with a great golf experience. In fact, Joe Williams, who was international chairman of the Nature Conservancy, touring him around, I got a little nervous when I was getting close to the golf course construction. I said, we thought about not doing a golf course. Well, I found out that Joe was not only the international chairman of the Nature Conservancy, but a longtime member of Augusta. So he did not think that nature and golf were mutually exclusive, but he said, Chaffin, you may or may not do a golf course, but if you do one, you better do it right. That's only Joe could tell you. And so we called on Arnold Palmer in a community called Semiahmoo between Seattle and Vancouver. And we asked him to come down and take a look at what we had in mind. Arnold who had a reputation for kind of showing up for the announcement and then showing up for the ribbon cutting, came here many, many, many times because we made it fun for him. You see him here inspecting the golf course after a little quail shooting. And when he got here, he said, let's go back up in the helicopter, because he'd land his plane in Savannah and he'd come over in a helicopter. Went up in a helicopter, looked down, he said, I see the golf course. If you go to the Nature Center, you go into the library room, Lucille's dad had a aerial done of the island in the 70s that shows all of the hunting fields and the quail patches, etc. What Arnold and Ed did was link those together. This is the 9th hole of the golf course. We moved about 40% of the dirt that is normally moved on a golf course because we were linking these hunting and agricultural fields. Here I am walking toward the 15th green and wound up looking like that.
Wow.
But look at the fields around. This was a wagon trail around the island that became 17. Very, very little. Very little. A lot of archaeological work there because the Altamaha Indians love that spot as well. So the goal was for it to be a park within a park. We hired a teenager to be our golf pro. Craig Lehman was our assistant pro at Kalawasi, came over to be our head pro, and of course has gone on to make many, many other contributions to Spring Island. His first pro shop was a single wide next to the ladies' tee on the first hole. We eventually built this wonderful brick column home that was modeled after a plantation building we had seen nearby. It is now the Long, Katie and Mike Long's cottage, and became known to many as Rosie's Grill. But it was our first real club house, first golf house, if you will, before the current golf house was built. First round in October of '92, and there is Dr. Pete right there, and Arnold and Ed and myself. We're just getting ready to have fun in October, and the grand opening in April of '93. And I have to say that when Betsy and I came over in that boat in in Thanksgiving of '88, we could hardly have imagined this. This was the grand opening of the old Tabby Links. So let me end with just a couple of metaphors, if you will. Sitting on our porch at Old Boathouse Lane, which is about 200 or 300 yards to the left of the Oak Alley, in October of '95, we heard this thud, a crackling sound and a thud, and we got in our car and ran around and found this magnificent live oak on the ground in the middle of the Oak Alley. And the next morning, Johnny Taylor said, well, you want me to cut this up and kind of move it out of the way? And our attitude was, no, just move it out of the way and leave it. But think for a moment, as you're going down the Oak Alley, about a third of the way down on the left, is this wonderful tree as a reminder of the circle of life. We said, no, leave it. Many generations have seen it grow. Let's let a couple of generations honor its passing. And Betsy planted a tree there,
Yeah, that's
so that the young tree is there to honor
yeah.
that tree's legacy. And so it is with our nature community that we live in, that we acknowledge and celebrate that circle of life. And finally, we penned these words, hard to believe, almost a quarter of a century ago now. When we were thinking about our vision of Spring Island, we wrote these words as part of the Spring Island philosophy. That, well, I'm sorry, that this was also, as part of what I was talking about, that circle of life. This is Elaine and Carol Anthony in the early 90s walking across the salt pond and sent us, and a slice of time has been reborn and a sense of magic rekindled. And that was exactly that cycle of life I was talking about with the tree. But thinking of our vision, we wrote these words. Spring Island will appeal most to those who come not to be seen, but to behold. Not to be heard by others, but to listen. To the special wisdom which only nature and history can impart. Everywhere the emphasis will be on quiet enjoyment and casual, understated charm. An escape, if you will, from the pretension and formality which has come to characterize too much of our daily lives. The future of Spring Island must be approached not only as an opportunity, but an obligation. That cherished sense of special place which past generations have looked upon this land must never be allowed to die. Frankly, Betsy and I hope you do feel, that all of you here tonight feel a sense of pride and celebration in what you have helped create here. This special human settlement with a continued special sense of place. And we really want to say thank you. Thank you for being.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here.